Good morning, guys. I'm out here this morning with the goats. Say hi, Joey. Hi, Joey. And Lenny Lamb, and the bunnies. There's your good boy. Oh, good boy. Good boy. Oh, scratches. Oh, scratches. It's a shame you guys are so shy. Oh, that one feels good, huh? But I wanted to get on here this morning, and I know that my page, my personal page and the farm page has been really quiet, and I truly apologize for that. We've had a lot going on, but I wanted to make sure that I gave y'all an update, and kind of maybe recount the story of the flood and what that experience was like for us out here. How you doing, buddy? Huh? Feel good? You're a good boy. Feels so good. So the flood, I'll just start at the beginning. So on July 3rd, it was actually the 3rd, barely. I think I went to sleep at about 11 o'clock, and I woke up at midnight on the 4th, because the thunder was like the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life. And so I got up, and typically when it starts to rain in the middle of the night, or anytime, I go out and make sure everybody's good. Like the horses have hay, and they're put up. You know, Prince and Valor used to kind of stay out in the round pen, and so when we would have storms, we'd bring them up into the barn. The rabbits, they used to be back with the chickens, and so we would put a tarp over their cages to keep them from getting wet. Hey, Noah. And you bring the dogs up, just all this stuff, all the things. And so I did that just like normal. I went out and got everybody kind of situated, and these guys, the babies, were still up front. They were actually kind of in the front yard in their little play pen, their baby pen. And I know that pen would flood, like it just a little, like it just held water like an inch when it would rain really hard. And so when I came in, I just sat at the dining room table, which has a window right there that looks out over where the babies were. And they were standing under their little pen, and they definitely looked miserable. Lenny especially looked so miserable. And but they were dry. They were just underneath the, hi Joey, you're so sweet. And so I thought, it's okay, they'll be okay. They were chewing their cud, and they looked miserable because it was raining. And there was just a little bit of water, to the point where, you know, they just didn't want to lay down in it. So I was just kind of keeping tabs on it. I couldn't go back to sleep anyway. For those of you who know, I'm an insomniac, so I don't sleep anyway. It rained pretty normal, I think, and Bracken had gotten up with me. Bracken had gotten up with me to move some of the chickens. We'd had some chickens that were out on the ground, and so we had already picked them up. And he was sitting with me at the table, and about, I don't know, 1 o'clock-ish, I told him, you know, just to go ahead and go to bed. He didn't need to be staying up with me. And he said he couldn't sleep. And so I just let him sit there a little bit. And it just kept raining. I'd have to go back and look, but we did get alerts about flash flooding. But I mean, here in Texas, I mean, I don't want to say we ignore them. We ignore them. Unless you're somewhere where you know that it floods, you ignore them. And even when you're not somewhere that you know does that, you know the places like in town or whatnot that flood. And so it's just kind of more of like a warning of, you know, I'm gonna have to take a different way to work in the morning because I'm not gonna be able to get down that road. It's never actually like meant flooding, like our homes flooding. So I think that we probably had gotten a couple of those, and I wasn't too worried about it. I think about 1:30. You are so sweet. Bracken and I went out. It's probably a little bit later. Well, no, we did. We went out and we checked the rabbits one more time. They were still good. We went ahead and just kind of moved them to a little bit of a higher ground. I think Ralphie was on the ground, and so we just had moved him up to a little bit of a higher ground. And then we came in and sat at the table again, and it was about I really want to say it was about 3 o'clock. Maybe right before 3 o'clock. And Bracken had gone out to check the rabbits again, and he came in and he said, Mom, the water, you know, they only have like half an inch and the water is gonna be at the bottom cages. And I was like, what? We were just out there. And he said, I'm not kidding. And so we went out to go check, and sure enough, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is getting a little bit higher than I expected. And the babies were still out front. They still had water in their pen, but again, I mean, it was just covering the little bottoms of their I mean, it was at the bottom of their feet. But they still just looked miserable. They didn't, I mean, I wasn't concerned at that time that they were going to drown. The chickens, they were all up on their coop. But at the time, they didn't really have a roof on the coop. Like, it was a makeshift roof because we had just tarped it, kind of, sort of. A lot of the enclosures were just temporary because we just worked with what we didn't have fencing, and so we had just worked with what we had. The rabbits, you know, they just had a tarp over their crates and they were stacked. The chickens are technically in a dog kennel and then just had the covering. And then of course the babies we had attached to like little dog pens, like the, I don't know, 32-inch and the 36-inch fencing. So we had zip tied those together, and that's what was enclosing them up front. And so everything was really pretty makeshift and definitely not prepared for a storm like what we were getting. And so we went ahead and brought the chickens in. At that time, we'd been bringing them in since they were chicks. We would put them in a really big tub and bring them in at night, and so they would sleep in the sunroom at night, and then in the morning we went out and put them back in the coop, just because it wasn't predator proof. So we had a couple different flocks at that point. Nobody had integrated very well, and so we had our group of like 9 or 10 of our big hens, and then we had two little groups of little birds, and that were kept separately. So we put the chickens, each of the flocks, in a separate bucket, in a separate tub, and we brought them in and we set them in the sunroom. And as we closed the door, Bracken said, Mom, there's water on the floor. And I looked down and there's water on the floor. And so naturally we both looked up, because that's what you're used to, water coming in. Like if there's water on the floor, like it comes from the roof. And so we looked up, and there's a weak spot in one of the areas, and so we both looked there. And I had told Bracken, I said, go get a bucket. And then we kind of noticed that it wasn't. I was like, wait a second, it's not coming from the roof. I was waiting for the drip, and it wasn't dripping, certainly not enough to have like a layer of water on the floor. And so I said, I don't think that it's coming from there. And then I heard Bracken say, Mom. And I could hear the fear in his voice. And I looked down at the door we had just walked in, and there is water rushing through that door. So there were some towels that had been right there. What are you doing, Brewster? And I picked up those towels. I opened the door, so the door and then the screen door, and I just threw those towels in that space between the big door and the screen door. I know that area is a little low, and so then I closed the door, and I was like, good, that'll work. And within seconds, it was just rushing in the same that it had been before, like rushing, it wasn't even seeping. It was literally streaming in. And I turned around, and the chickens, we had 3 different tubs, like the big tubs. I don't even know how big those are. They're bigger than like the 27-gallon tubs, the real big ones. We had 10 hens in them, and they were floating. So all 3 tubs of birds, including a tub full of 9 almost fully grown hens, was floating. And at about that same time, I think the alerts went off on the phones. And one of the dogs yelled. So we've got a couple dogs. We've got, Victor the German Shepherd, and then of course little Pup, and Kira the Husky. I think Victor was in a crate under the carport, and because he didn't have any shelter, so we brought him in and crated him in the carport. And Kira has her little igloo. She loves her igloo, and she's a pretty laid back gal. And at about that time, we heard her, I don't know any other word for it, but scream. Like, we heard her scream. Don't think I've ever heard a dog make that sound before, and definitely not her. Like, she is so laid back and so level-headed. And so all of this kind of happened at one time. And so I told Bracken, I said, I'm going to put the chickens in the upper level of the house. Go get the dogs. And he said, well, what do I do with the dogs? And I said, try to bring them in. But at the very least, everything needs to be loose. Let the goats and sheep open their door. Let everything, let the sheep, the goats, the dogs, let everything loose. I wasn't really worried about the horses yet at that time. Their shelters up here, they were all in the barn, which is what I'm sitting next to here. They were all in the barn. And so they, as far as I was concerned, they were the safest out of all the animals. So Bracken went to go do that. I moved the birds all into the kind of the upper level of the higher level of the house, which was my kitchen. And I went out, and the rabbits, I think my two little rabbits were in an actual hutch. It was built off the ground, so they were actually the highest. And so I stacked everybody else on top of that hutch, and then made sure that they were covered with a tarp. And then I went back inside and did the best I could. Maybe I'll show y'all maybe later, but the sunroom, off the edge of the sunroom, there's we were using it like as a den. It had a couch, it had the entertainment center, the TV, it was a playroom. Like the boys had some coloring stuff in there. And my sister and my mom had just come. They'd been there for about almost a week, I guess. And they were actually, my mom had left that same day, and my sister was supposed to leave that morning. They'd come and helped me get organized. I didn't have a lot of storage, no shelves or anything like that, and so we were still kind of living out of boxes, and we moved from a 2,000 square foot home into like a 1,000 square foot home, and so we just didn't, some of the stuff was in storage, but some of it was here, and we just didn't have a place to put it up yet. And so my mom and my sister had come, and they'd purchased some furniture for us, some bookshelves, and we had just got that all done. In fact, that room, that den, that playroom, we had done that day. And so there were a few boxes that hadn't, their contents hadn't been gotten out yet and put up, and so they were just kind of sitting on, they'd been organized and they were sitting on the floor in front of the couch. And some of it had been moved to the car. Actually, quite a bit of it had been moved out to the carport. My mom had spent a lot of time organizing stuff that needed to stay stored outside in the carport. So we had, we'd organized it. What was stored in the carport was pretty much stored. And then we had an area that we knew needed to be put on a trailer and taken to storage, and another section that like needed to go somewhere else, either belonged to someone else or needed to go somewhere else. And so that's where we were, is that we'd been doing that organizing, and it was under the carport. A lot of it's still in boxes, because that's what we were doing. We were taking things out of boxes and going through it and putting it up. And we'd done that July 3rd. So after I did the rabbits, I came back inside, and the water had gotten higher. And so I went into that playroom area, and the water now had started coming. There's a door in that room that goes to the outside. It's actually kind of behind the pump house here. You can see the house. So there's a door right back there. Actually, it would come out where the pump house is, and the water had started to seep, coming from that door, coming from the back of the property. And so there was water in that room, and so I started to just try to pick up whatever we had out. All the kids, we stored the kids' board games in there, we stored their toys, the coloring books, DVDs, game systems, the games, those were all, and books. We had some books, and they were in that room. And so I was just picking things up as quickly as I could, either throwing them in boxes, but I was throwing them in boxes and picking the boxes up, and the boxes were falling apart because they were wet. And so there's a lot of stuff floating. It was hard. So I just put what I could on the couch, and it seemed like it wasn't a good use of my time, I guess. I got what I could on the couch, but then it was like everything that I was trying to pick up in the boxes was falling out and dumping everything in the water, and it was floating and having to chase it down, and so I just kind of gave up on that. I unplugged the kids' TVs and the game systems in there. I was able to unplug that. We had a fridge in the sunroom. I left that plugged in, actually. And I think at that point, I went out into the garage and went to get our cat. So Bracken had just gotten a new kitten, Mittens. I'm surprised he's not out here, actually. And he had been crying. I had heard him crying, and so I went out to go get him, and I couldn't find him. But when I did go out, I found Toby, our outdoor cat. And we've had him since he was born. So I grabbed Toby and I brought Toby in. And I get inside, and Bracken has brought he's got all the dogs in. And he brought the sheep, the 2 baby goats. He brought them in from their pen. Their pen was probably at that point holding a good 3 to 4 inches of water, at least. So again, they wouldn't have been drowning at that point, but it was deep. And we were, at this time, we're all still receiving the alarms saying, that it would end in 20 minutes or whatever. So we ended up just shoving all the dogs in the bathroom. Victor and Kira, and then Puck. I was shaking a little bit. And so they all just hung out in the bathroom together. That was fun. And then all the cats. We didn't find Mittens. He made it through the flood just fine. I don't know where he went, but he found a place. And then I had like 3 or 4 different flocks of chickens in 3 or 4 different containers, and we ended up actually combining them for space reasons, which was perfect. That worked out in our favor after the flood, because we'd ended up kind of integrating everyone. And something that I love about animals, and it makes me think about Noah, these animals, whether they got along initially or before, everybody got along. We were just shoving everybody together. The birds were all shoved together, the dogs and the goats and the cats, and because everybody was just at that point trying to survive. And so there's no fighting, nothing. Everybody behaved, even the chickens. Nobody picked on anybody, and they were all crammed in there in tubs together. We had one hen. We weren't able to get all the birds out from the yard. We were able to get most of them. I guess we did that in the morning, so we hadn't brought her in yet. So the water just kept rising. We sat at the kitchen table, and the water just kept rising. When I came in from the door and I came into the kitchen from the sunroom, we had a basket of laundry because our washer and dryer is just out. You have to go to the carport. And I just picked up that basket and dumped it behind me, in front of that door, because if the water rose up past that step and tried to come into the upper level, I was hoping that all that laundry would maybe slow it down and give me some more time. So any laundry I could find, I just dumped in front of the doors of the main house. And at that point, the water level was getting pretty close to the steps. And that step is, so when it was all said and done, I think they measured the water in the sunroom was at 8.5 inches. The water in the playroom or den was 6.5. So, and I would say that step is maybe like, I mean, it's about 8.5 inches, maybe 9. Because the water level, that's how we were gauging how the water was rising, was by looking at the front step and the step into the sunroom, and it was level with the step. And we kept getting alerts that, 20 more minutes, and then 20 minutes would go by and it would say another 20 minutes. And we would just tell ourselves, it's okay, we just got 20 more minutes, we can deal with this for 20 more minutes. And I think it's about 4 o'clock, 4:15, and we got another alert, and that one said that it was, hey Joey, that it was anticipated to stop at 7:15, and the water had still been rising. And so when I got that one, I realized that I was probably about to have to make a decision. The little babies were still asleep, the little boys, and I realized that it was time to start thinking about whether I needed to get them on the roof or try to get them down the drive. But of course, in either of those scenarios, my animals were going to be left behind. And that was terrible to think about. And so at that point is when so it's just me and the boys here. And so at that point I contacted Josh, who's staying up the road, and let him know that I needed help. And so he came, and it's interesting when we talk about it now, because when he stepped out, he actually had Ty with him, and when he stepped out over there where he's staying, which is like north of us, not much, but north of us, there wasn't anything on the ground. It was like it just looked like it'd been raining. And so I'm sure he was like, she is crazy. Like, what is her deal? And he says he got in the truck and went to turn and get on 87 and couldn't access 87. He hit water before 87. And so he actually turned around and tried to go the other way and hit more water. Then he realized that there was something more going on, that this wasn't normal. And so he drove through the water on 87. He came down 87. And he said that when he got to our gate, because our gate, so it's lower, the back of the property is just slightly higher than the front of the property. So when he got to the gate, he said he got out and he opened the truck door and the water was right there. And he got out and had to wade waist deep to open the fence. So he came, and he was a huge help. There was a lot of stuff. I mean, like, everything was floating. So everything that had been in the carport that we had, anything that had lived in the carport, but then had been temporarily relocated to the carport, was everywhere. Like, it was just floating. Stuff was floating. Things you wouldn't think would float away were gone. Like, they were floating. I think at that point, when we got that last alert, while we were waiting for Josh, Bracken and I sat down at the table and we prayed. And it wasn't a pretty prayer. I expected it to be a normal prayer, but it wasn't. There was a lot of yelling and asking why. I felt like I had worked so hard to get where we were, and I had obeyed. I know that God called me to step away from everything, and run this farm, do this farm. I know that that's what He's called me to do. And so it just felt like I would take one step forward and go like flying back 100. The farm had, we had just had a little group of kids come out. People were starting to come out. Like, the farm had really started to kind of do its job. I was seeing it start to work. We had kind of gotten to a point where we could function, at least with what we had. We didn't have real enclosures, and we have a really rickety round pen. I mean, it's ridiculous, but we were finally getting somewhere, it felt like. And the flood kind of felt like it was taking that all away. And so yeah, there was just a lot of screaming of like, why would you call me to do something that I know you're calling me to do? I never once doubted that. Never doubted it. I've never doubted that. Hey, Lenny, baby. He's doing his job. This is one of the benefits of like running a therapeutic care farm. Oh, bud. I never doubted ever that this is what He's called me to do. I just didn't understand why it had to be so hard. And so, yeah, it was not a pretty prayer. And when I got done, we'd had that last alert. I think Josh had just gotten there. And I literally just laid down on the kitchen floor with the chickens and the goats and the sheep and the cats, and just laid there. I was like on a pile of laundry. And I had just told myself that when my phone gave the next alarm, that then I was gonna have to make a decision. And Josh got there, and he just God bless him. He got out of the truck. He came in and he did make sure that everything was good. And then he went to go check on the horses. I had not gone to check on the horses. I think at that point, I wasn't in a place where I knew that the horses were going to be the last animals I needed to worry about. But they're also going to be the ones that I worry about the most. I knew the big horses would probably be okay. It was Pony that I was worried about. I mean, to be fair, you know, Lenny, he's not much bigger than Lenny, and I had already brought them in. And so I had asked him to please go back and check on them, and that if he needed to, just to open their gates, you know, so that they could find their own high ground. And he came back. He said that they were okay. He said that the water was up to Pony's chest. But everybody was okay. Nobody was in a situation where nobody was frantic, and they all had each other. They had their buddies back there. And then Josh just started picking things up that were floating by him. I don't remember a lot, honestly. But I remember, I mean, because Josh was out there for a couple hours before the rain really stopped, before we could do anything. And so during that time, I mean, he was just out there in it, trying to stop things from floating away. We let the baby sleep. The baby slept through all of it. And the rain finally stopped. It didn't stop. The rain didn't stop. But probably at about, I don't know, 4:30 or 5 maybe, it stopped rising. So it was still raining. But every time we would open the door and check where the water level was, it wasn't rising anymore. So the water had hit the top step of the porch, the front porch, and then of course that step in the back. And it was still raining, but that water wasn't rising above the step. And that was about 4:35. And then somewhere around 6:30 or 7, it started to slow. And the little boys had woken up. And so I think about that time is I was just going through the motions. It was like a fog. Probably a little bit of lack of sleep, and then crying and fear, shock. Flood, so I've been faced with like fire. I've had to move horses before because of a fire, and that's scary. I'm not gonna lie, that's scary because you can't anticipate, you know, where a fire's, and this was in Lubbock, so you cannot anticipate where a fire is gonna go. I had a trailer, and so that was the most comforting thing, because I was able to just load my animals, the ponies, and Bracken was just a little baby, and I was able to get my horses out of there. And I think this time that was one of the hardest things, was that I could certainly put them in the Expedition, and then once Josh was there, we could put them in the truck, but I had no way to save my horses. because we don't have a trailer. And so I ended up texting some friends. I don't know, I mean, they're friends, but some of the most selfless people I've ever met in my life. Larry and Gwen Dias, and they live in Brant. And Gwen had just donated a saddle like that week before. And I knew that she had trailers, and we talked about vets and whatnot, and trailering to vets. And so I sent her a text message, and looking back, I don't know that she ever even would have come to mind if we hadn't spoken just a couple days before. And I texted her and I said, we're flooded. I need to evacuate my horses. And she texted back immediately. And she just said, Larry's on his way. No questions asked, just Larry's on his way. So, hi Joey. It's okay, baby. Joey's super worried about me. He's like trying to climb in my lap. You're a good boy. So Larry got here so quick. I mean, coming from Brant, and he was like, had a flatbed truck and a trailer. And I saw him pull up, and so I came out. I think we'd at that point we'd moved the goats. We'd put them in some of the dog crates. We just shoved everybody in some of the bigger dog crates, and we had set them on the trailer that we have out front. It's a little bit on the higher ground, and then of course it sits like this. And so we put the lamb and the 2 goats were in a crate, and then all the chickens had been moved out there. And so when Larry pulled up in that big old horse trailer, we carried the goats and the sheep down there. The water, I mean, it came up to in some of the areas down the drive up above my knee. So they would have had to swim, or they would have drowned. They couldn't have touched the bottom. And so we carried them to the front, and that's kind of when it started to kick in maybe a little bit. I started to realize it's hard because, like I said, the shock, it happens so fast. It happens slow, but it happens fast. And it's confusing. Bracken made a comment. We had that tornado last season. The boys were in Robert Lee, and I was at work in Angelo, and so we were trapped. And the tornado sat right there over 208, making it where even if I wanted to get home, I couldn't. Like, the tornado was literally between me and my children. And Bracken had taken the babies down to the basement. And it's one of the most terrifying things he's ever experienced, that and the car accident. And he made a comment about the flood and said, Mom, I'd rather the tornado, because it's just quick. It's quick and it's over, and then you can start processing. And in the flood, you feel like you should have time to process, but you don't have time to process. It happens so fast, and your brain has such a hard time comprehending why there's water, like, in your home, why there's water in your home. And so we carried them down to the end of the drive. And at the very end of the drive, it got really deep. And there was like a line of trucks down the road, down Chadburn, and they were all in the middle of the road. And that's kind of when I was like, wow, there's a lot of water, because they couldn't drive. You could only drive down this little area down the middle of the road, and even then you had to have a truck or you weren't going to get through. And I didn't know it until way later, but if you go like a block or two down, you couldn't get any further down that road. The house is actually catty corner to me. There's 2 houses catty corner to me that were completely underwater. They were roof rescues. And so we loaded up the goats and the sheep on the trailer, and then I came back to get the horses. And I remember walking down this drive right here, like from the house. So I was walking down this drive, and Valor's stall, well, he was in this one right here with the pony. And I just grabbed a bridle from the tack room. I remember looking at him, and he's standing there in several feet of water, soaking wet. And he just looked at me with his big eyes, asking if I was okay. Water dripping, like there's water dripping off of his little forelock, his face. And his big eyes just looked at me and asked if I was okay. And so I grabbed the bridle and I put it on him, and then I just jumped on him bareback. And we opened the gate, and there's stuff floating everywhere. And of course he hesitated. He's an Arabian. And I just asked him to do it for me. I knew that it was scary, but I needed him to walk. I needed him to walk down the drive. And he did. And the pony just followed. And I rode this little Arabian horse that I've only owned a couple months down my flooded drive, bareback. With furniture and household items floating all around him. And he just marched down there. And we took him into the middle of the road, and I jumped off and asked him to get in the trailer, and he just got in the trailer. And side note on Valor, I got Valor from a young girl that was graduating high school, and she's had him for like 5 years. She'd had him for 5 years, him and Prince. But before that, this horse came from a kill pen. He'd been in a kill pen, which is heartbreaking. He's one of the best horses I've ever met in my life. And he was so brave. So he went down there, he loaded up with the goats, and the sheep were in the front of the trailer, and then I had to come back and get George. And I was a little worried about that. Again, he's an Arabian, and he just turned 4. And he's got a little more of an attitude than Valor. I'll just put it that way. He has an opinion about everything. And so one of my friends, Sylvia, and Billy McCleary had come. And so Sylvia came back and had haltered Ringo. And so she led Ringo, and then I led George, and George never bat an eye. He didn't spook. He didn't balk. Just walked right down there, right down the drive. I asked him to get the trailer. He was going to be the last one, so he's in the last slot. And it was a cattle trailer. It's not it was a nice cattle trailer, but it's a cattle trailer. And George is used to some better accommodations, I think, especially as just a 4-year-old. And so he told me, "Are you sure I'm supposed to get in this trailer? Are you sure?" And I said yes. And he jumped in. He jumped in, and we closed him in, and then we sent them on their way. And so Larry and Gwen took that group to their place in Brant. And I will forever be grateful for them. And they kept the animals for 2 weeks, fed them, cared for them. Gwen would send me updates. I felt terrible because I did not have the time. I was concerned about the animals, but there was so much going on. And so being able to have someone send me those updates and not have to ask for them was huge. And so she would just send me daily updates about how everybody was doing, and not having to worry about them was fantastic. And then there was another gentleman who had been behind that Larry's trailer, and so he saw that there hadn't been space for Ringo, and so he actually came and picked up Ringo and took him to another gentleman's property, a separate gentleman's property, and Ringo lived there for 2 weeks. Again, no one said a word about feed or board, or I didn't know these people, and I cannot thank them enough. I cannot thank them enough. And so we got all of those guys off the property, and the chickens were on the trailer. And so once that was done, there was really nothing to do because the water was still just floating. Oh, my Lanta. Oh, he quit doing it. The rooster was literally running. Rooster. We call it his fanny pack run because he looks like he's got a fanny pack on his booty. Rooster. And he's free range, and so he had climbed up on the roof during the flood, and he stayed there. I think at one point he jumped down, and he ended up right on the other side of the pump house, standing in a couple inches of water, and so I had to go rescue him. But there's nothing that you can do after the flood. There's nothing immediately after you can do. There was still over a foot of water outside that. So the water line on the outside of the house measured about 13, somewhere between 13 and a half, 14 inches on the outside of the house, like up at the house. And it was definitely deeper down the drive. Like the further down the drive you got, the deeper it got, because Pony actually had to almost swim when he got to the gate. So it was incredibly deep. And we ended up just opening the door. We opened this back door. I can't see because the sun is getting in my way now. We opened this door. So the door to the carport, which you can kind of see, or yeah, the door into the house from the carport. And then the door that's behind the pump house that I mentioned. And then the back door, the little back door where the water initially was coming in that faces the road. We opened all 3 of those doors, and it was like a river. I had like a river running through my house. And so you could literally sit there and just watch stuff float through my house into the pasture. So there's nothing you can walk around in it and, you know, scoop stuff up, which that's really what Josh did. Josh kind of spent that whole morning doing that. And once I had the animals safe, there wasn't really anything I could do, except like clean up the house, obviously, because that was complete chaos. It was complete chaos. So that really, I mean, honestly, that sums up the first day, and that was July 4th. When I went to bed that night, there was still water down my drive. Like, there was no, you could come off the porch and step down the steps, and you just stepped into water, and that was that. There was no dry ground. It was just, you were in at least 6 or 8 inches of water, at least. And so just went to bed that night, and then the next morning, that's when cleanup started. And I know I'm hitting the hour mark on this, and so we'll have to talk about cleanup in my next video, I think. I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna upload this, but I'll talk about cleanup here in a second. I'll do it as a separate video because I don't want it to run like forever. But that's where we're at. So stay tuned, I guess, and I will share part 2, cleanup, next.